And your book starts with a beautiful little anecdote about how trees in Australia had been given email IDs.
Right, right. I mean, the trees in Melbourne were suffering from drought, and a very large percentage of them were suffering. And so they assigned email addresses to these trees so that people in the community could write to the city foresters and say, look, such and such a tree is in danger. They were trying to sort of crowdsource these trees for their care. But of course, what ultimately happened was people, had an emotional response to these trees. They wrote love letters to the trees, or what I call tree mail. They
Right.
really reached out and had many concerns about the trees, were concerned about them, had very intimate things to say to them. So I put that story in there in the introduction because it said something about how much kinship and how much connectivity people felt with trees without any particular prompting. They offered up these stories, and so it also shows how widespread these feelings are.
And some of the emails, you quote a couple of them, they are like asking for help from a tree. Maybe you've broken up with your girlfriend for all you know, and it's writing to a tree
Right.
so what should I do, dear tree, or whatever.
That's right. I've got feelings for so and so, and it's almost like writing to an advice column for some personal advice about how to manage their relationships, which I found very striking.
What explains that intimacy? I was just telling you before recording the book that this library behind me is that of my young kid. He's just 6, and there are books, whether it's Peppa Pig or,
Yeah, sure.
books that talk about, there's something about planting seeds, trying to grow trees. There are lots of stories around it. Also, the other day, I've got a good friend of mine whose father was telling me that in the place where I live, in the suburb, in the small colony, he looked at 4 trees around me and said, look, that is the one that I planted. That is the one so-and-so friend's dad planted. That he's about 65 or 70 now. And they had done this when they were in their 30s, and now kids are playing under it. So there is that kinship, the word that you used. What explains that over the years, centuries?
There's a great quote that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago because then they grow. But I think the thing about trees is that everybody recognizes them. Everybody also has a personal kind of experience with them. They've climbed up them. They've watched them go through the seasons. If they're in a part of the world where they're deciduous and they change, their leaves, they drop the leaves, they grow the leaves back, they have different color leaves. And the other thing about trees is, they're dynamic, so they continue to grow, especially if they're small and you can readily see them grow. I planted a tree in my backyard when my oldest son was born. He's 18 now. We planted it the week he was born. It almost tipped over in about 2011 during a big windstorm. We winched it back upright and it didn't die, and it's now 50 or 60 feet tall. And so you can people mark the changes of the seasons and the passage of time, I think, with trees.